So thank you for the introduction. We're going to be talking about conflict intelligence, conflict IQ. And I'm going to share about how is it that the book came about and why is it that I believe that it's so important, like Linda had mentioned in my introduction, as to how it's important to have conflict intelligence in the workplace. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about how this methodology and this concept of conflict intelligence came about. And I'm going to share with you as to how is it that I see that it's so useful, not only for professionals, but for organizations to be conflict intelligence in the main process that I share my deck here. A little bit about me Linda already mentioned about who I am, where I'm from. You know, I'm a native from San Diego, California, raised and born in between the borders. And I think that the fact that I was raised in between the borders, I have the opportunities to build different perspectives because I was able to experience a first world country, the United States, and a third world country, Mexico. And that gave me a different perspective about life, career, and leadership as a whole. And already Linda mentioned a little bit of my experience, my background, so I'm not going to share with you more of that. I want to start with the name of my company very quickly, and why is it that I chose the name Unitive. Unitive came to me in 2010 while I was doing my master's degree, and I learned what unitive meant, and I fell in love with the idea about seeing possibilities to bring about leaderships that have these certain type of qualities of levels of consciousness, and where leaders could lead without ego, without pressing so much on their ego side. Where leaders can lead through wisdom and combining their knowledge and wisdom to lead others. So that is how the word unitive, what it means and how it came about. As I was doing more research and also working with leaders in organizations and working with professionals and going out into the community to different organizations and offering my speaking, my conflict resolution trainings, I was able to little by little identify that this unitive concept had more to it than just what it meant, the levels of consciousness and bringing people to a space in their life and where they can be there as a whole person in order to go out there and lead others. And when I talk about leaders, I want to make clear that I don't necessarily talk about in a hierarchy of an organization. I'm talking about the leaders right on the higher level. I'm talking about an inclusion process of leadership throughout the organization, because the way that a leader throughout the organization can lead really creates a valuable culture, not only within the organization, but with those people that we serve outside of that organization, those people that we touch through our services, our products. It creates a big impact. So in my level of definition, I think that a leader could be anyone in the organization. And that is what my focus of this methodology that I have developed through conflict intelligence is about. How can we be inclusive? How can we bring everybody to the table? And how can we provide this methodology to everyone in the organization so that they can lead in whatever capacity they can in order to make our organizations a better organizations in our communities, right? So briefly, unitive way, that's how it was, conflict IQ was born out of that, in where, the real characteristic of a person that have the ability to harness conflict and not be afraid of conflict is that they have a persona or an ability or an aptitude that they're there for serving others. They're not there for themselves, but to serve others. They have inner peace because they have done the work that it needs to be done in order for them to feel peace within themselves, in order to be there for other people. to know who they are as a person and not be rattled and not be fearful with other people's ways of thinking, or perhaps ways of showing ideas triggers them, rather that they're inviting to be curious and be open to possibilities. And that is where creativity, it's there, right? When you bring this type of individuals that are open and inviting to others, you get the possibility of having creativity in organization, and creativity in organization is the most valuable asset. Not to say the human asset is not, but the human asset, the human capital brings that about, the levels of bringing creativity into organizations, and that is where we can serve the most in organizations. Then the concept about conflict IQ, that's where it was born, and examining how is it that bringing in the skill sets, because conflict intelligence is not necessarily just a skill set, but it's a mirage. It's a mirage of skill sets and abilities to raise your levels of consciousness to a level where you are in a state of openness and peace. There's a famous quote that I also base my book on, from Albert Einstein, that you cannot serve a conflict from a level of consciousness where it was created, because you're not going to get anywhere, right? You have to learn how to maneuver and elevate those levels of consciousness so that you are in a state in where you can create and where you can use your skills, your abilities, and be able to transform not only yourself, but those around you. So that is what conflict intelligence is about. And, I know that the slides are pretty dense here, but I'm just trying to go over the information as quick as possible so that I can have more space for you guys to ask questions at the end. What is conflict IQ? Well, conflict IQ, the way that the methodology that I teach, it really heightens people's ways of thinking, because when we're able to bring those levels of consciousness on people, and where they're not in their past, and they're not in the future, but rather be in the present, is where people are able to create the most and be there for other people, be there to be of value, and be there to lead when it needs to at all times. It enhances the ability to relate with others in other individuals in a positive and in intellectual way, and not only as human beings, but in a positive and intellectual way. Augments people's emotional intelligence, because not only do these people that understand conflict intelligence know the distinction about their emotions, how to name the emotions, and how to deal and not be an individual that reacts to emotions, but it's also attuned with others, people's emotions, and the ability of how to work with them. And on top of that, be able to have the opportunity to have the ways of having those difficult conversations that sometimes that everyone dreads to have, right? Everybody fears conflict. That was one of the things that I realized when I was studying this degree, and when I was going out there almost 12 years ago, when I was going out there and talking to organizations, talking to professionals, that they dread the word conflict. The companies not even want to mention that there was conflict in the organization. But indeed, there's always conflict whenever there's human beings. And just covering up the conflict is not good for an organization, because it affects the overall culture of the organization. And at the end, it affects the community that works in that organization. And by working with leaders to become conflict intelligent, it also transforms the entire organization as a whole. So I'm not in it here just for transforming or changing that leader or that professional that comes to me, but I also see how these conflict intelligent methodology really creates a domino effect, not only in the human being that is learning this concept, but also in the organizations, the families that they have, in the community that they touch. So That's why I'm very passionate about what I'm bringing about here, because I know that, underneath I'm going into organizations and saying, this is for you to get better at your career. This is for you to get, better of, going into the next level of your career. But I know that when they get exposed to this, they become a different person. They impact those not only around them in the organization, but those around them in their family and outside of the organization. That's why I'm very passionate about this. How, these open doors ways to become conflict resolution competent. And how is it that by employing these skills, you raise your levels of empathy, you raise your ability to understand at a deeper level what inclusion and belonging is all about. I think that we're living right now in an era where we're just throwing that words of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's a lot of people that don't really understand the deeper concept. Because in order to be able to be in a space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have to transform the human being, not only to understand it from a knowledge level, but also understand it of what type of human being you have to become in order to build diversity, equity, inclusion relationships in the workplace. That's why this work that I'm doing with Conflict IQ, I also offer it in organizations that are working towards developing these programs inside organizations, and that's why I think that it is very pivotal, because we're transforming people from the inside out, right? I make reference to the levels of consciousness with Robert Keehan. He was one of the top leaders in organization and developer of theories of organizational development. And one of the things that he mentions is that, according to him, leadership is a spiritual entity that can be attained only by advancing in certain levels of human consciousness needed to tackle and organizational problems. So I was very inspired by what he said in the research that he did in human capital and leadership. And that's why I knew that I was into something when I was developing the conflict intelligence methodology and while I was using it with professionals. And like I mentioned before, one thing is to be able to connect to people from a exterior level, but what is it to be able to connect to people by having those levels of empathy, having those levels of connectivity, and being able to be in a space in where not your past, not your triggers, not the things that happened in the past, you're bringing all of them in front of you when you're talking to other people, but rather be in a space of curiosity, in a space of service, to be able to be there to connect with other human beings. That is what I believe, that this is very important in today's world. And how is it that in the past couple of years that we have gone through these worldwide situation with the pandemic, political situations, and diversity, equity, inclusion needs, we as human beings have changed so much that we need different leaders in organizations. We need to be able to find ways of how is it that these leaders are going to be more humanistic, more attuned to other people. And I think that that's why this is important. I mentioned a couple of years ago, I wrote an article that really caught a lot of attention, because I think that I put the magnifying glass on something that organizational leaders were not paying attention as well. It is the leaking bottom line of what happens when you don't foster and you work on the human side of the organization. Whenever there is conflict in organization, it's very typical to either try to put it under the rug or send that to the human resource department. And one thing that I've learned, having gone through a whole certification in HR, and now teaching for that same HR program, and now be the chair of the HR program at UC Santa Cruz, I went in it trying to figure it out how is it in what aspect of the human resource, the human side of it was lost and it wasn't there. And I was not able to find it. And that's why I wanted to make an impact by creating courses to teach HR to deal with the human side. What happens is that usually human resource, they only follow policies and procedures. And they're dictated by the legal counsel inside organizations or those legal counsels that are hired to protect the organization on any lawsuit. And humans, we work somehow with those policies and procedures, but not necessarily, because we also need to address the human side. I cannot tell you how many times working to develop a dispute system design in the county of Santa Clara, I was able to work with individuals that not only had a couple of years of not talking to each other, some of them even 15 years having issues, that when you address the human side of the situation, things transform. People start talking to each other, not necessarily like friends, but as professionals. I was able, with the work that I was doing and developing inside these equal opportunity department at the county of Santa Clara, I saw it through my eyes how many people from having formal complaints filed in the EOD office, that they retracted those formal complaints because their human side was addressed. They were able to have that communication with the other coworker where they were not getting along well, or there was misunderstanding, and we're able to see that by following a formal procedure, it would only escalate conflict in between the human side of the people. It would not do a lot of good. Obviously, formal complaints have their space in their necessities to protect people, and I totally understand that, and to protect your organization. But not all of these human conflict needs to go through formal complaints. But unfortunately, the departments that we have inside organizations, their only way to deal with it is just to follow policy and procedures because they're concerned, they're afraid to toggle or talk about the human side. And that is because they don't have the ability and they don't have those trainings. But if we were to create more of those leaders with conflict IQ inside the organizations, we have the ability to transform organizations. We can make them more productive. We can make healthier organizations in the workplace. And that is what I'm all about. And I hope that with your help, I can achieve this. The effects on unresolved conflict, I already talked about, we're talking about healthy organizations, but we're also talking about healthy individuals. One of the things I quote in my book, it's a talk about Carl Jung. This is a very famous psychologist that back in the 1960s, that he said something along the lines that the people that were sitting across from his chair were people that in some way or another were not able to resolve conflict with the other human beings that they had in their life. And little by little, because they didn't have the ability to do that, they went through life and continue following the same protocol of how they were not resolving conflict with people. And those were the people that ended up with psychological issues and sitting right across from him. As we probably might or might not be aware, having people that become sick in the workplace affects, not only their morale, but it affects the ability to come to work, the attendance, the high levels of price in our insurance go up, because the more employees we have sick, the more the insurance will cost everybody. And, I'm pretty sure that I'm not the only one, because I have gone through personal hardships inside the workplace. I have gone through bullying. I have gone through micromanagement. I have gone through cliques. I know firsthand what it is to lose your health because of that, because of not having a good workplace environment, a healthy workplace environment. So I'm not talking here about only my knowledge and my master's degree that I have in this area. I'm also talking from the heart, because I know what it is of being in those type of environment. And that's why also that brings to my passion, because I want the best for employees that spend 80% of their waking hours inside the workplace. If you do the math, 80% of your waking hours you're spending in the workplace. And let me tell you something, that even though we are working in an online environment, people still have the visceral reaction whenever they need to go into online meetings with people that they don't like, with leaders or managers or supervisors that they don't like, that they feel threatened by. They still at home, they have those visceral effects. So not because they work inside the house, conflict resolution diminish, actually went in the contrary, because now not only they're still dealing with the issues that haven't been addressed in the work, but also issues of working inside home, dealing with everything that the pandemic brought to our lives, and dealing with family members that, get sick, and mirage of things that people now deal with. So believe it or not, conflict in the workplace has increased, although that people are working online. Well, conflict, it's toxic. When organizations don't have the ability to transform conflict from an emotional standpoint to a cognitive standpoint, conflict is not useful. It becomes extremely toxic. And by teaching leaders to become conflict IQ, conflict intelligence, what I'm offering here is to give them the ability to transform these toxic emotional conflict into conflict that they can use to develop better workplace environments, to be able to provide better services in the communities, to be able to provide better products into the communities, because their employees are looking into the issues and not fighting against each other. Many times I go into organizations and work with project managers, and they said, Yvette, we're not able to meet deadlines. We're having issues and we need to do this. And it is not the process of the project management that is the problem. It is the people's problem. And when people are able to realize that their human side of it is affecting the development of that product, then we remove that from that. We change that into a cognitive problem, which is addressing the issue and not attacking people. Projects start moving fast and people start developing whatever products and services they're dealing with. I already mentioned about my story. I'm not here just because I'm book smart, if you might say, but I also have my own personal experience in the workplace, and that's what I bring in my teachings too. We talked already about the value of positive culture in the organizations and what it could mean to the bottom line organizations, right? There has been already a lot of research, and for example, the Association of Talent and Development has a research study that it was done in 2019 that mentioned that conflict resolution, the ability to communicate with other human beings, it's missing, and we need to tackle that because it is creating a lot of loss in organizations. And like Linda said in the presentation, conflict resolution back in the days was considered as a soft skill, but it has nothing soft out of it, because it really involves not only teaching it through skill base, but also transforming people's ways of thinking about it and transforming behavior. So that leads to that this is a very solid skill that is needed mostly for leaders in the organization. And I have a famous quote. I don't know if you have ever heard about Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. And one of the things that he mentions over and over again is that whenever he was going out there and working with high-level executives in Silicon Valley, one of the things that he would say is that what got you here was your education, all the years that you spent in your job, being able to know the organization's ins and outs. But what not gets you there is not knowing the people skills and not knowing how to work with people. And that is what he was constantly been coaching people on, because leaders were brought out to become managers, supervisors, VPs, but they didn't know how to deal with people. They didn't know how to deal with the conflict, the human side of it. And that is what he mentioned many times. So I just put a list here of the mirage of skills that being a conflict intelligent person, it's about. But that, that list is short. That list is short. And I think that when somebody is able to address conflict in a very intelligent way, it does raise the levels of emotional intelligence. The reason that I can affirm to that is because I have worked with leaders where I have tested them in emotional intelligence. And some of them are in the low, some are in the middle, and some are in the high. And even those people that I have seen on the higher levels of emotional intelligence, they were still fearing conflict. They still didn't know how to have those difficult conversations. They still were nervous and having, nights without sleep because they had to deal with conflict in the organization and dealing with their direct reports, with other peers. And that's what I figured out, that what I was teaching had and the next level up of emotional intelligence. Let me see how we're doing on time. Nowadays, we also deal with so much technology, right? Sometimes as humans, we think that there's no other human on the other side of the screen. And that is what I call mechanical distance, that we don't feel the other people, or we don't pay attention that there's a human being on the other side. And we deal with that type of separation, and we don't pay attention that we might be saying something in our communication, our voicemail, in our texts and our emails that affects people. And sometimes people don't pay attention to that. And that is something also to be addressed in how, by changing the levels of consciousness on people, you're going to be able to communicate better, not only for what you say, but body-wise, your tonality, the way you write your emails, your texts, your voice messages, right? Because that is very key. You don't know how many times I have coached people to say certain things in a different way and be able to get to the outcome that they wish to have whenever they're working with other leaders. And, like I said, conflict resolution is not a new thing. It has been here way before even the legal system existed in the 1800s. This is the way we were working many, many years ago in our tribes. Back in the days, they were always looking for the wise, older men or women in our tribes in order to help us resolve conflict. And that is where anthropology came about and brought all of those information, knowledge, in order to develop these field of alternative dispute resolution. Anything that has to do outside the legal system, that we can work in a human-to-human way. So I just wanted to point that out to you guys, that this has been with us for a long, long time, but we have lost that. We have lost that because we have always think that everything has to be resolved through the legal side of things. And it is a very expensive way, and it is not a humanistic way of how to deal with things. And it is not the best way, How was trust established in ancient communities? We talked about, a little bit about that. It came about building, communities build their own culture. Communities build their own rules, right? And then communities build an ambient of security, right? Somebody that comes with conflict IQ brings that about, brings all of these three areas about, because that person creates trust in others, that is not going to be judged, it's not going to be criticized, and it's going to be open to hear whatever they need to say, right? The power of talking it out, it is very important. It's as simple as that, but a lot of people just don't know how to do this, right? And I have that opportunity to work with leaders to help them to communicate differently, and creating assumptions of other people or creating judgment. That is what our brains pretty much do every day. Our brains are designed in one way or another to do that in order to take care of us and to make sure that we're alive the following minutes of the day. But we don't realize that somehow we do that over and over and over again. And we do that with human beings all the time. And that breaks the ability to be able to have those deeper, meaningful conversations with people. Each organization is like a community with many micro communities within. Would you agree with that? Right? Would you agree with that? Community means strengths, joins our strengths to do the work that needs to be done, armed to hold us when we falter, in a circle of healing, a circle of friends, someplace where we can be free. And I quoted this person because there is an area of alternative dispute resolution called restorative practice that talks about how is it that when we talk in community, in circles, I actually bring this to organizations, and where people get around and start talking in a human way and things transform. I just wanted to bring that to the attention, that this is part of being able to lead and facilitate conflict IQ in the workplace. Well, we already kind of talk about conflict IQ, the difference between conflict EQ, that is the academic ability to be able to have knowledge. And then we have the EQ is defined as the ability to identify, evaluate, and control your own emotions, right? And in conflict IQ, it's higher, and it's a higher level. And, briefly, I want to talk about Pedro's story about a person that I coach. He was an employee of a restaurant. There was a nonprofit organization that was offering these coaching programs to these small business owners. And he wanted to develop a coffee shop, and he had a partner. And he was offered the opportunity to have this coaching, and he came to me. And he didn't have no education. He came to the United States, the most difficult way to be able to make it through the United States. He was working at a restaurant washing dishes, but he had his dream to build his coffee shop with his partner. And he reminded me too much of my father, because he was a self-made man. He was the one that inspired me for the work that I do right now. And no formal education, my dad, but he was an amazing servant leader. Someone that to this hour of the day, somebody talks about him and tears comes to their eyes, because he was such a gentle servant leader that he created so much impact on other people. And he reminded me of my dad when he came to me. And it was amazing to see that he thought that he was not intelligent. And then I told him, if you go back and think about the people that in your school, when you were in school, and you were to think about those students that you thought about that they were intelligent, what has it been of their life? And he said, they have never made most out of it. I was the one that left my community, that came all the way to the United States and did all of this. And I said, that is when I taught him about emotional intelligence. And he realized that because of all of the experience that he has gained through putting himself at risk, putting himself out there, he was able to realize that he had this level of intelligence that he didn't know about. Then I took him into a conflict intelligence so that he can have a better relationship with his new partner where he was building the coffee shop with. And he was ecstatic. It was an amazing feeling to see how is it that, somebody that would think that he was not intelligent all of a sudden realized that he had the ability to be a coffee restaurant owner and be able to work with his partner and be able to serve the community in the best possible way. So I just wanted to share that. I have it in my book, The Little Story. Conflict intelligence methodology explores the intricacy of conflict intelligence as an essential discourse in an organizational growth, right? I go in there and I work with the companies to really identify what is going on in the organization, the culture, and be able to address where is it that the service of conflict intelligence is needed? If it's through trainings, through mediation, or developing a system design process in order for them to own that and be able to have people trained inside organizations to do this work. But I just, I want to share with you why is it that it's so important to be able to have these organizations and for people to have it. Mastering others is a strength, but mastering your own is powerful. And with conflict intelligence, you get to learn that. You get to learn the levels of how to master your emotion, master your ways of thinking, master your ways of levels of consciousness, be able to flip from one levels of consciousness to the other, to be able to bring creativity, to be able to deal with other people's emotions, other people's situations in a more empathic way so that you can make an impact on others. What else? I want to impact the whole world. That's why I'm here. And I really am grateful that Linda gave me this platform, this opportunity to share my passion, to share my work, because I'm here to want to make an impact, not only in organizations, but in the whole world, like I was explaining before. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette.
When people are bringing into the table different ideas, different ways of thinking, it is very common that people want to interject and share their own ideas or their own thoughts or their own ways of doing things. And when you do that, psychologically, people go into a defensive mode. Right? They go into a fleeting fight or flight mode. And there's no way to build communication when people go into that state of mind. If you are trying to savor or hold on to a position or a way of doing things, you're not going to get anywhere. Where I teach you here, it's how to go into an interest base and be in a state of curiosity and asking the right questions to be able to understand how and why or when this person came about that idea or that way of doing things, in order to understand their side, in order to understand how is it that they came about to develop that way of thinking, and see whether if you're missing something. And trust me that whenever people are able to be heard and able to be listened to that level, and where you're not criticizing, judging, or wanting to bring your own ideas, but rather listening, that people open up. People open up from their heart. People open up, and they're willing to listen to your ideas. They're willing to hear your ideas, right? And it is there where the discussions happen. And you can share the differences, perhaps the new ideas that came about from that communication when people open up. People many times have the tendency to hear an idea and immediately close down or get angry or say, that's not going to work. When you shut down other people in that way and you say, that is not going to work, you're shutting down people's and their ideas. And people's ideas are like our babies, right? We don't want to be told that our ideas are not good. But how about if you shift your way of thinking, your way of communicating, and you see that idea and find at least a 10% of that idea that it's a good idea, and you change the way you talk to that person, and you change your ability of thinking and say, I really like this idea that you have, and I can see that it's coming from this way of thinking, and perhaps you're thinking about doing these things better in this way. But I'm wondering, how did you came about these other pieces of the idea? I'm curious. Instead of interjecting and immediately giving your idea, people are going to shut down. People are going to, close down. They're not going to be in a good psychological space in order to be able to hear you. So that would be an example of how I would say that you could go about opening up people's perspective and be able to have dialogues instead of fighting for it.